Taoiseach, as you know, we've had the publication of the O'Higgins report into deficiencies and malpractice into a series of investigations at Bailborough Garda Station and areas surrounding the station and its hinterland. We had a lot of selective leaking in advance and managed interpretations of that report, which I think were quite disingenuous and leading people down the wrong tracks. But I think it needs to be said and put on the record of the House that the O'Higgins report essentially vindicates, in the first instance, the central recommendation of the Geardon report. And the central recommendation of the Geardon report was, of course, to establish a commission of investigation into the series of allegations made by Sergeant Maurice McCabe on a number of occasions at various levels of An Garda Síochána, but contained in a dossier that he handed to me, which I handed to the then Taoiseach, Enda Kenny, who on foot of that dossier initiated the Geardon report. And the Geardon report is very clear about the veracity, credibility of Sergeant McCabe and the allegations that he made, and recommended that a commission of investigation be established. Now, and it covers a whole series of investigations of incidents where there were serious crimes committed, victims not dealt with properly, not served properly by the institutions of the state, and particularly on Garda Síochána on those occasions. The most noteworthy being the case of Jerry McGrath, who went on to murder Sylvia Roach Kelly following earlier criminal acts in terms of the abduction of a child in Tipperary when he was out on bail, and of course the assault on others. So when I put the point basically, and it's a long saga as we know, but throughout all of this, Taoiseach, there's been a campaign to undermine Sergeant McCabe. There seemed to be a fundamental reluctance to accept the veracity and credibility of what he was about, to such an extent that it got all the way to the establishment of a commission investigation. If you look, I'd ask people to read Chapter 11 of the Higgins report regarding Father Michael Malloy, the missing computer, incredibly ending up in Sergeant McCabe being brought before for disciplinary hearings, of which he was later exonerated. I'll be trying, but
we have strict time limits, okay, but I have to ask you, please,
I'm going to put the question. He was later exonerated, that has to be said. But that's what makes the revelations in last week's Irish Examiner all the more disturbing, that senior counsel, on the instructions of An Garda Committee, it's alleged, basically put forward the view that he was acting with malice, and they were questioning his motivation and his character. Right away through, said the senior counsel. Notwithstanding what Geardon said about the absence of malice, notwithstanding what McGinn-Byrne says about the absence of malice. And it's a very serious issue because it cuts to the heart of how whistleblowers are treated and the degree to which there is acceptance within An Garda Síochána at the highest level about the credibility of the individual concerned making the allegations, about his reputation and the veracity of the claims that he has made. And that's why it's so serious, and that's why Taoiseach demands comprehensive and transparent addressing of the issues. And I would ask you, Taoiseach, have you spoken to the Garda Commissioner in this regard? Will you speak to the Garda Commissioner? No. And will you find a mechanism by which this issue can be comprehensively and transparently dealt with?
Martin Taoiseach.
Thank you, Deputy Martin. Indeed, I want to acknowledge the role that you played yourself in highlighting the issues in relation to the victims whose cases were investigated in the O'Higgins report. Firstly, I want to reiterate the point I made when publishing the report, that we should not lose sight of the central fact that at the heart of this report are the victims who were let down, and you make that point yourself. And I have already paid tribute to Mary Lynch, who spoke last night on the Claire Byrne show and illustrated very vividly what victims went through who were the subject of these investigations. I phoned her this morning and will be meeting her next week, now that I'm in a position to do so. I think, like you, our focus should now be on taking all the steps necessary to ensure that this doesn't happen again. I've said already in the House there are constraints in what I can say about the claims you mentioned that have appeared in the media under the Commission of Investigations Act 2004, which formed the legal basis put in place by the Oireachtas. In his report, Justice O'Higgins referred to the confidentiality of the proceedings, saying that he took all necessary steps to ensure confidentiality in the way he approached the Commission. I would say that all 97 witnesses who were before the Commission have rights, and I and others have a duty to respect those. I have a duty too to respect the law, and that duty is not diminished by the fact that some media reports have appeared, as you say, purporting to set out a small part, of what may or may not have happened at the Commission. It's private proceedings, notwithstanding any legal prohibitions in that regard. And I will make the general point that partial disclosure of what happens in private at commissions of investigations are inherently unfair to those who participate in such commissions and properly feel bound by the laws which apply to them. It was a matter for Justice O'Higgins to reach conclusions based on the hearings and to report as he saw fit, which he's done. He has made the points in relation to Sergeant McCabe and the service and the approach that Sergeant McCabe took when he took the actions that he did. I would say that the judge did not make findings or comment along the lines of some public comment lately. That's to be noted. And I would say we must remember that Justice O'Higgins is the person who heard all of the evidence and is uniquely in a position to lay out the conclusions, which he has done. And I think the history of the unhappy events dealt with in the report show the dangers of people proceeding on the basis of incomplete information. I think we have very comprehensive information now from the report. I'd just like to make one or two further points, if I may, Ceann Comhairle. Justice O'Higgins acknowledged the cooperation he received from all persons. This was not an adversarial hearings, these were inquisitorial, and he makes the point that every legal team that responded in that way, and that they were generally followed, and he doesn't make any adverse findings as to any aberrations by counsel when they attended for any particular party. And I would want to note the Garda Commissioner's comments last night on those issues which have been in the public domain. She repeated that she accepts fully the Commissioner's findings, and of course that includes accepting fully what the Commission had to say about Sergeant Maurice McCabe.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Supplementary, Deputy Martin.
Very quick points. Are you satisfied from a legal perspective that the Act concern and the section of the Act actually covers legal instructions and submissions? Because I've been so advised that it doesn't cover actually legal instructions and submissions by senior counsel. Secondly, my understanding, Taoiseach, is that it wasn't inquisitorial in respect of Sergeant McCabe. It was actually extremely adversarial, is what I understand, and that almost every single thing was laid at his doorstep. So that is why I'm saying the issue does need comprehensive treatment and needs to be addressed comprehensively and in a transparent manner. That there was a sense, rightly or wrongly, that the person making the allegations felt to be the person on trial throughout the process. And I accept that the report itself is very meticulous. Although, as I say, in relation to Chapter 11, and indeed into an earlier issue pertaining to a GSOC inquiry relating to the Mary Lynch case, again, Sergeant McCabe was wrongly accused there and vindicated because, luckily, he had a tape recording of that particular issue. He was wronged completely in terms of the Fordham Malloy and the missing computer. Clearly, he had a recording of the conversation with these two officers who apparently alleged in advance that he was motivated by malice. One wonders if he hadn't taken those protective measures, where would he be now in terms of the court of public opinion?
Thank you very much.
And given the selective leaking, and there's an issue for all of us in this House when you look at what transpired over the last 3 weeks and how these issues got articulated, how there was selective leaking, spinning and interpretation. It's very easy to see how a person in his position would have been extremely vulnerable if he hadn't taken the protective measures that he took to protect his reputation and his credibility. To be fair to Sean Geardon, I want to say this much, because he's been much vilified in recent times as well. He went to the trouble of getting statements from all of the people in charge of Ballybor from 2003 onwards, and they're exemplary in terms of their commentary on Sergeant McCabe's character and in terms of his conduct. And that's an important point. One wonders, was there an attempt to undermine the Geardon report in its entirety? I don't know.
Thank you
I
very
don't have
much.
all the answers to it, Tánaiste.
Thank you very much.
But it does need to be comprehensively addressed.
Tánaiste to respond, please.
Well, obviously we will have a debate in the House in relation to the Commission of Investigation, Deputy Martin. I think that's important that we look at all the different details in relation to this. What you've said in relation to the Commission of Inquiry is not actually what Justice O'Higgins said about the hearings and the way they were conducted. I mean, what he says is that that they were inquisitorial and not adversarial. And that's from the judge himself. He went on to say that this non-adversarial method was generally followed by all legal teams. There were a few isolated aberrations from this approach, but he did not attribute what he referred to as aberrations to counsel for any particular party, and I think that's worth noting. And he was the person who heard all of the evidence, and I do think we need to look at this report. I have met the Commissioner, and as I say, she accepts fully the recommendations and indeed the report, and has made it clear what her attitude is to Sergeant Maurice McKay, both at this point and in the past. And she's made that very clear in the statement, and I think we have to accept that statement from the Commissioner.
Thank you, Tánaiste.
In relation to the other points you make about legal privilege, suffice it to say that I think we would be going down a very dangerous route for future commissions if we were to believe that all legal privilege, professional privileges between clients and lawyers, if we were to insist, not that we could, that should be in the public domain. I think it's important that we keep confidence in the Commission structure, and I believe that keeping that confidentiality is part of that.
Okay, if you would